You know, part of the impetus for this discussion is that over the years, as anybody knows, obviously Steve Helmuth was the chairman of SVG for about 3 years or 4 years. I can't really remember which. But I've always been really kind of amazed at the way you, as a league, embrace technology. That goes back to, I believe it was a screening, it must have been in February of 2006, or the Dolby Theater across the street of the Lakers game in 3D, which blew everybody away back in those days. And of course in Las Vegas, that wonderful NBA All-Star game in Las Vegas with that amazing screening. So obviously you replaced David Stern and he drove a lot of those initiatives, but I hear that you have been quoted as saying that if you weren't NBA commissioner, you would probably be at a tech startup. Is that true? Are you a techie geek?
Which am I using? This? Hold on. Yeah.
I've got a handheld.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So, I think I was quoted as saying I'd be in tech. I'm not sure if I could make it in a startup, frankly. I've been with a pretty mature business. Is this on? I've been with a mature business most of my professional career, but I have been fascinated with technology. For a long time, I ran NBA Entertainment. It's really how I got my start at the NBA, and I've always been fascinated with production. I mean, I think, again, working very closely with Steve Helmuth over the years, we stepped back, we looked at our arenas from early days as broadcast studios. And I think our biggest battles, in essence, have come with our teams over the years, where we wanted to ensure they were lit properly, where we reserved the right places for our full complement of cameras, where we were able to put audio where we needed it, where we had the back-of-house facilities for our broadcasters, with the recognition that while we want these hot broadcast studios, because we all know from watching live sports on TV, if you're just flipping through the channels, I'll stop and watch almost anything if there's a hot audience, because there's a lot of excitement around it. On the other hand, we have to balance that. One need to create this exciting environment with the fact that, especially now as we're very global, that well over 99% of our fans are experiencing the game based on those images that are coming out of our arenas.
Well, how do you, because I've been having discussions here with some people who are working with architects at other leagues, and they're envious of how you are able to get the owners to kind of work with you and understand that. So what do you see as the trick? And why do you think it's harder for other leagues to get some of their owners to kind of say, yeah, we should compromise skyboxes and seating in order to make the on-air TV product look better?
Well, credit should go to a lot of people. One, back to my friend Steve Helmuth. He's been at this for a long time, at the league nearly 30 years, and where we've been making presentations to our owners, explaining them why these images are so important. And I remember Steve and I, from early days in terms of low-slash cameras and other presentations, making back-to-back presentations. I remember Steve and I had a discussion with a group of owners over the low-slash position. And I remember that iconic Michael Jordan backpedaling shot after he scores a basket. I think anybody of a certain age can picture that shot. And we were demonstrating to them that without that low-slash position, we could never get those kind of iconic shots. So I think part of it is Steve's presentation abilities, frankly, and us being in there, and Don Sperling in the old days, and Greg Winnick and others in there. There's Don. I didn't even know you were there, and I gave you a pop. So us going in there and making this paramount. And now for our owners, I think from early days, we had a lot of media people, whether it was Jim Dolan owning Cablevision in New York, other cable operators, other people with media backgrounds and broadcast backgrounds. I remember back years ago at NBC, Dick Ebersol asking, which was not typical in those days. Everybody seems to do it now, but where we invited Dick Ebersol to come in and make a presentation to our owners on how important these images were for our fans, the kinds of elements they needed to get their job done. So the owners were great. And then compliments to the players. I think part of it, there's a unique kind of personality in basketball, and I think it's part of the way they're acculturated around the game from a young age. They have fans literally right up next to them. Whether it's in a high school gym, they're standing right there. Then even in college, the proximity of fans, and of course in the NBA with courtside seats, no helmets. They don't go into dugouts during timeouts. And I think the players intuitively understood that proximity meant a lot in this sport, and that I think we did a good job convincing them and the coaches that there's no reason that people who are sitting courtside should have a certain level of access in terms of what they see and, frankly, what they hear that we shouldn't give to the rest of the fans who are following our game, whether on through some form of media or social media. And I think they bought into that over time. And I think we did some experiments, too, to demonstrate to a lot of our coaches who didn't want to be mic'd. We said, well, look, you're in a hot studio, and the quality of smartphones is so great. I mean, if you can picture an NBA arena and how close the fans are, they're literally on the benches now, that we sort of said, be on notice, that anybody who's right behind you, and I found I have to be careful in an arena because I'll be explaining something to somebody, and you don't know when somebody's holding a smartphone literally this far from your head, it's very obviously easy to pick up the audio or now the audio and video of everything you're saying. So I think it's a combination, but the whole ecosystem of the NBA has really lent itself to these kinds of great images coming out of our buildings.
So going back to you mentioned working at a tech startup and how you're working at a mature organization, but that's not always, that's almost harder, you know, because technology is changing so quickly, and social media and OTT, that, you know, it's kind of like turning an aircraft carrier. So what do you see as the challenge of trying to make sure that your organization is always forward-thinking and forward-looking, and not an old battleship?
It's a great question. I think it's the challenge that probably so many of the people in this room work through, and that's when you have disruptive forces in an industry, and I think in many ways the internet has been very disruptive to our business. Over the top has been disruptive. I think convincing the owners that while we have to have one foot in the present and one foot in the future, and again social media is a good example. I think we took the approach early on that we should embrace social media when, frankly, other leagues were sending takedown notices to YouTube. And we decided, let's use this as a marketing platform for the league. Let's embrace Facebook in the same way. Let's embrace Twitter. And we made a calculation that ultimately we can still preserve our core rights fees, you know, at the same time use these platforms as marketing engines. And I think we were very fortunate that we have enlightened broadcasting partners. I'd say John Skipper and the folks at ESPN on one hand and David Levy and Turner on the other hand, who said, we accept your rationale. And it wasn't obvious in early days. I mean, there was some consternation about our desire to embrace those platforms because, of course, they're also, these two broadcast partners of ours are competitors with each other, but at least in an advertising market, they're also competitors of those other mediums. So I think we are fortunate in saying if you look at least the NBA ecosystem, we're in a position where, you know, I'm sure you've heard this analogy before, sort of snacks and meals, that we can sort of allow people to snack on NBA content, but if you want a meal, that high-value content from the NBA, you have to subscribe, be authenticated, or whatever else to get it.
So not to put you on the spot about, you mentioned John Skipper. You know, in ESPN, as you know, every quarter they get put in the sites of the media that says, oh, they lost these subscribers and they're cord cutting, and then it causes some consternation. They still have a pretty good business. They still do pretty good as far as what their subscriber fees are. What's your sense on, because they are valuable partners to you, right, as is Turner and others. How do you make them comfortable? Because I think they can always think, well, the goal of the NBA and all the other leagues is to get Facebook to bid or Google to come in, or, you know, so how do you make them comfortable that, you know, you are going to value them as a partner and that work with them on navigating these tricky waters?
Well, I mean, one, that's what contracts are for, obviously, and they have a certain set of rights. And, you know, I mean, there's actually a really interesting article by Alexander Wolf in it's either this week's or last week's Sports Illustrated sort of talking about these very issues. But in essence, they ensure when they contract for their games, of course they have those games in all platforms, but it's not just some esoteric legal right. There's weekly conversations with them about what other platforms our games should be appearing in. And there's no secret in terms of what the marketplace is seeing at Disney, at the bundle. And of course, on one hand, our ratings are going up and have been going up over the last several years. On the other hand, the pool of subscribers, many of whom presumably as part of basic cable packages, at least some of whom aren't watching ESPN, are no longer going to be paying for it. But then the question is, where are those new subscribers going to come from, or where are those new homes? And I think they're getting caught in the switches a little bit, but I think my view is over time they'll be fine, because on one hand, if that basic cable universe, let's say, has gone from roughly 100 million to 90 million homes, at the same time, they've gained 200 million homes in terms of smartphone users, in essence, people carrying high-definition televisions in their pockets. And the process for authenticating those subscribers is still incredibly clunky. They have to make a business decision about at what point they're going to begin offering their product directly to those subscribers who choose not to be part of the basic bundle. But part of that, it's math, it's predictions, it's consumer behavior. But when I see the value of ESPN as a brand, the experience they have, the accumulation of rights they have, I think they're in a great position. And also, I can say firsthand, as somebody who works with them every day, sort of at the Disney level, obviously in terms of Bob Iger, and then John Skipper and his colleagues at ESPN, these are extraordinarily smart people who sort of eyes wide open, paying attention to the world. I mean, they have no choice but to keep one eye on Wall Street, and I get it, and in terms of how they see their business. But, they're very, all I can say is when I sit with them, I have the confidence that they're very focused on the future. And I'd say one validation for example, our recent rights package, we did roughly similar deals, value deals with Disney, ESPN, and ABC on one hand, and then TNT, Time Warner on the other hand, is the AT&T proposed acquisition of Time Warner, where they're obviously paying a premium, and part of that premium is to acquire the NBA. So, and I can say, having been in the marketplace relatively recently, that to your point, some of these new platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, they're getting into sports. No, are they at the level yet where they're paying multi-billion-dollar rights fees? No, and it's my hope they'll get there one day. But in the meantime, the more traditional bidders for those rights were very much there at the table and valuing high-value live sports content, as highly as they ever have.
Well, Eric Shanks mentioned when this came up a few years ago at an event held at the Paley Center, and he said, what if Google goes out and buys the rights to the NFL? That's great, but the whole point is we have all these. To your point, we have all these other rights. You create a destination for a sports fan, and that if Google just had the NFL, they'd probably have to make a deal for TV. You couldn't stream the Super Bowl. So, I mean, do you think that is that true? Do you think that making a one-off deal, I mean, for a league, isn't enough for an OTT player, if you will?
It depends. I would say some of the most interesting technology and experiments that I've been fortunate to see over the past year or so is some of those aforementioned technology companies have given Steve and me and others from the league office demonstrations of what they would do with television, how they would handle the production of live games. And as you can imagine, I think they're looking at it with a very sort of fresh and new perspective. I mean, one of the things everybody in this room knows, for example, that while HD has changed the very nature of viewing our sport. I mean, it's quite incredible. And then, of course, 4K, but where you can really see the ball and see the players' faces. It's absolutely unbelievable, and given the size of the monitors from where we were even 10 years ago. But now, but yet, the production itself has been fairly similar, at least since for the 25 years I've been in the business, and obviously much longer as a main play-by-play camera, and it sort of goes back and forth. They're roughly using, the same frame of reference, plus, low slash, high slash, et cetera, and maybe, cameras under the basket. These guys are taking a new approach, in terms of how they use the real estate on the television screen, sort of where they place the cameras. I mean, one of the things I know some of your early panelists today talked about, the so-called mobile view, we're calling it now, that so you can choose a different camera angle on your smartphone and says, taking into account it's a small screen, that you want to have literally a closer view of the action. What's interesting is that we've experimented a little. It may be that given the quality of HD and the size and these big screens, people may want to see that same sort of angle actually on a large screen now and not just on a small screen. But then add on top of that other fields that they can make available with these large screens, and I think those are fields of data, unique approaches to the game. I think there's, of course, daily fantasy, than just flat out sports betting, which, putting aside what may or may not happen in the United States, that is very much legal and something we're involved in other jurisdictions outside the United States. So I don't think, they're going to flip a switch and, YouTube, to your point, is going to be streaming the Super Bowl overnight, but especially in terms of our package of games, maybe, one of the things that gets lost sometimes, people say, well, your rights are locked up for the next 9 years, but of course that's just in the United States, where our games are distributed in 215 countries and territories right now. So there are a lot of other countries, a lot of other regions for us to experiment with those services who are just getting into the business and saying, all right, let's pick, and their data is so incredible. I mean, you can only imagine, people here understand, but take Google and Facebook, what they're sitting on in terms of understanding who those consumers are, who those viewers are. And so you can take pockets of fans in certain countries in Africa, Latin America, Europe, a burgeoning interest in basketball in India and other places like that. So there's a lot of exciting things that we can begin doing right away, and we'll see what happens in terms of the U.S. market.
So speaking of globalization, so in 2008, I went to Beijing for the Olympics, and then went out to the countryside, right? So we're deep in the countryside in the rice paddies, and they're beautiful. But, it was amazing. People were watching the NBA, watching the Olympics basketball team. And in the back of a rickety old bus, people would be talking to us about, Kobe Bryant and the NBA players. So are you amazed at the globalization, not only of the NBA, but of all sports? I look at NBC, what they do on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings with the EPL.
Yeah.
What's your sense on just globalization and what that means for leagues and sports?
Well, I am amazed, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for high-value content, because in the same way, English Premier League soccer is some of the best soccer in the world, and because the time zone's going the other way, means on weekend mornings, Saturday mornings specifically, they can make that package available to U.S. viewers, and it's great content. And I think there's also a recognition that, and we see it the same going the other way for basketball, that if you're a basketball fan in Europe or other parts of the world, that you're only going to presumably be able to dedicate so many hours a week to watching basketball. And so while the MLS is also doing very well in the U.S., people also have this opportunity to watch some of the best soccer in the world coming from Europe. And other leagues are looking to bring, in the case of the EPL, they're fortunate to have that broadcast package. But of course, in terms of over the top, you can buy virtually anything, now and streamed, from La Liga, Bundesliga, or whatever else. So now in the NBA, we're really fortunate because unlike in soccer, where there's multiple great leagues around the world, and throw MLS into the mix as well, every young boy and increasingly young girl, now that we have a WNBA, who aspires to be a professional basketball player, regardless of where they grow up, only dreams of being in one league, and that's the NBA. And so what we're seeing is with basketball enormously popular in China, and it may or may not be more popular than soccer, probably sort of neck and neck these days, and Yao Ming's the perfect example. And so yet Yao Ming, growing up, the dream is, yes, to play for his national team, and I think that game when you were in Beijing in 2008, I think that's still the most watched basketball game in the history of the world. I think supposedly China versus USA, something like 1 billion people watched that game. But now, for Yao Ming, the dream then became to play the highest level basketball to play in the NBA, and that's what we have going for us all around the world. And so for us, and it even goes back to those conversations about Google and Facebook now, Facebook live streaming or what Twitter's doing, it's all of a sudden you can have a discussion with somebody about reaching a global audience. It's certainly a more efficient way to negotiate a deal. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to reach all those people, but it's quite incredible to be sitting with a partner like that and to have the reach and also to have the analytics of exactly how to reach those people. I don't know if it's been part of your presentations today, but Dan Reed, who used to run our development league, became head of sports at Facebook, and he's shown me some experiments where they'll post a live stream of, he's showing me an example of a woman's pre-Olympic soccer game, and by posting it on certain people's accounts, and because they know analytically how to track those people, they can instantaneously, without any promotion, have an audience of well over 1 million people. It's quite incredible when you think that our games on TNT, are getting a 1.4 rating. I mean, it's so. What I think for people in the sports business, what's so great is that these services, these other platforms, they're just beginning to understand the power of live sports. And the good news also, they're hiring people like Dan Reed to come in who have the history, the relationships, understand how our rights work, which is a really good sign for all of us.
I also saw that the Liga is going to change the times of their games next season so that they're more friendly for the Asian market, which is crazy. They've done the times at, I think, 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and they're going to switch back to like noon, and the fans are upset, but they're like, hey, we want to grow the game in Asia.
Just on that real quickly, we've had discussions, roughly 12-hour time difference from the East Coast to China, and so we've talked to our teams. We're not quite there yet, but the issue is on, for example, a weekday morning, would we play, let's say, a 10 a.m. game in order to be in prime time in China? I mean, I do worry a little bit in terms of NBA athletes. They're on a certain sleep cycle. And in all seriousness, I mean, we used to sort of joke a little bit about it, that they'd be sleepwalking out on the court, but then we've gotten a lot, and they've gotten a lot more sophisticated about the impact of fatigue on injuries. And then you wonder, do you really want some guy whose body is accustomed to waking up at 11 o'clock playing at 10 a.m. and, but I'm sure over time, when the largest audience we can reach, of course, is outside the United States, it's invariably something that we're going to look at over time, shifting time zones here. It's a lot easier than traveling to China to play the game.
So the other big challenge that I always hear when they talk about ESPN is the young kids, how the kids don't watch TV. We talked about this earlier today on the social video panel. It's interesting because you have, since these kids don't watch TV, since a lot of them are watching on devices, you can use social media as a league to really create the next generation of fans and kind of reach out to them. What do you see as the role of social media, to do that and to reach out to those fans, to younger kids, and really get them on board for life?
I think, part of the role of social media has to be it's an age-old issue in sports of storytelling, and to demonstrate to them, to engage them with the personalities, to engage them with the sport, a deeper understanding of the sport, the rules of the sport, in the same way that, my dad was a big baseball fan, and I was a little kid, and I used to sit there and he used to do the box score by hand, and you'd be following him, and I'd say, what are those little marks on the card, and what does that mean? And it sort of brings you into the game. I mean, I do think for the industry, we do have to be very focused on a decline in young people watching live sports. I think it's not, and it's not only important that they watch live sports, but that they become fans of teams. And I know, for example, Don Sperling is here from the Giants. That's something they talk a lot about. It's how do you connect with fans at a young age and build that lifetime tradition of going to games and following it with your family, and parents watching it with their kids. I mean, that's something we talk a lot about, and to us, we don't want all consuming to be done sort of in the bite-sized social media way. I think we want our fans to feel connected to our teams. Now, what's interesting is that we used to think of ourselves as limited by the geographical boundaries. I'd say so if you're, like, I was just thinking this. I said this the other day when I was in Cleveland this year, and one of the real fun parts of my job is I get to give out rings to the championship team. And you look back at all the speeches that begin over the years, and the commissioner traditionally says, and to the fans of Cleveland, of Northeast Ohio, and you start thinking, wow, I'll say that, and of course we're very reliant on those fans filling the building, but boy, that's a tiny fraction of the fans who are following the Cleveland Cavaliers of LeBron James. I mean, there's a billion people around the world following him. So how do we embrace the new world of all those people? So, so on one hand, maybe, fewer young people watching traditional television, but now a whole global market of young people to talk to. But I think I think that's one of the challenges for the industry. I think, and part of it is that, and I know all the leagues are looking at format, whether that means commercial format, start times. We can't take them for granted. And we got to make our games, we got to continue to make them entertaining, adding other production elements. I mean, I know TNT a few years ago experimented with sort of the kids broadcast. I mean, you can have more audio channels. You can have announcers who are talking specifically to kids. You can have camera angles for kids. You can have, there can be explanations of rules that maybe the adult, more traditional viewer doesn't want to hear. So, but we have to be very focused on that.
I always think back to when I was a kid. I went to the NBA All-Star game at the Brendan Byrne Arena, which was amazing, one of those lifetime experiences. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe. It was right there. You started the game on 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think about, people always look to the NFL, and I wonder, to your point with start times, the NFL, the Super Bowl starts at 6 o'clock. It ends at 9:30. I mean, and then you look at the World Series or, some of the NBA Finals, they start late, and kids don't get a chance to really just, unless you're really engaged and your parents say, okay, you're a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, so I'm going to let you stay up to watch this. If you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan, your parents aren't going to let you stay up to watch that game. So do you think start times, is that something that could be addressed? Or?
Well, first of all, so we have 7 games to work with, of course. So one thing we've done is we've moved our Sunday night games an hour earlier, in part to accommodate that. But of course, the tension is that we know we play at the time that optimizes viewership. And that's the hard part for people to understand sometimes, that if we go earlier, our rating will be lower. Now, it's true that if we go earlier, we might capture some more young fans. But those very young fans who go to sleep, it's minuscule numbers, additional numbers that we'll capture by going earlier. And of course, when it may be 9 o'clock Eastern time, but it's 6 o'clock on the West Coast. And I think especially during the week, the notion that people are going to have to leave work early to try to watch our games. I mean, we constantly look at all these things, but we're playing at the time to optimize ratings. Now, I think what's happened to baseball, of course, when you go past a certain time at night, you can graph it minute by minute. I mean, if the game is, incredibly, action-packed and close, you'll be able to hold more of the audience. But, traditionally, East Coast, you get to a certain time, whether it's 11:45 p.m. or whatever else, and you can see in the minutes by minutes the rating starts to drop. And so, again, we've taken a fresh look at our formats. We tip closer to the hour. We added last season, if you see in our arenas now, we added clocks so that timeouts weren't sort of left to the whim of whenever the official happened to blow his whistle or players taking their time coming back in. There's a clock. The clock starts, buzz. They have to be on. Same 20-second timeouts, full timeouts, doing the same thing for halftime now to move the game along. And even while we think it's important to use replay in certain instances, we don't want to overdo it because, of course, that elongates the game. And we've also looked for ways to increase the pace of our replays. In fact, just this year, we took a whole host of the category of calls that are made during replay and moved them to the replay center. So the call's there, it's made, the referee walks up, foot on the line, red ball, whatever. And our view is every 20 seconds matters. And so we've got regular season games now down around 2:18 as opposed in a 2 hour and 30-minute window. And I think we can even shorten it a little bit more, which helps.
So one of the highlights of my year is always going to the tech summit that you have at the NBA All-Star Game and watching the debate about statistics and analytics. And I know that you guys are knee-deep in player tracking and all kinds of great things. I always love watching, Charles, you watch these amazing basketball players, Charles Barkley, Magic Johnson, and then they're like, it's all about the heart, it's not about this. I'm like, yeah, that's because you had a lot of talent, So what's your take on, how do you think that player tracking, this stuff will improve the game and change the game and make players better?
I love those debates, but my response is it's an easy thing to say, but of course they're both right. I think it's no different than in everybody's business here. I've sat in lots of business meetings in my career where people presented data, but then you need people who are engaged and passionate to carry out those plans. And I think that a little bit, there's some gamesmanship that goes on at some of those conferences too, because I know firsthand there are some GMs I've watched on panels who say, I never look at that data, who have 20 analytics people, in cubicles back in the office, in the sub-basement of the arena. So they're looking at the information. I think it's fascinating. I think that in the case of basketball, in some ways we were late to the table. I mean, certainly from where baseball started. Some of it's fascinating. We use a company called SAP, that in essence has a billion, literally, permutations of our data that they crunch. And sometimes with data, patterns emerge that you might not have expected. I think, especially one of my particular focuses, still think defensive players are undervalued in this league because there's no easy equivalent of points per game, and no easy defensive rating the same way as they're offensive. And it's nice to see, like, take Bruce Bowen when he played for San Antonio, a player like that start to get the credit, because there are new types of statistics that measure that value on the court, that preventing a point from happening is just as valuable as scoring a point. And so I look now when they do customized feeds for all our players. They know every move of every player on the court. I think, look, I don't think it's an accident. I think part of why the game, at least to my eye, looks so good right now, and I think the game itself aesthetically has never looked better, part of it is the result of a lot of the analytical approach to a better understanding the game, ensuring that the best possible player is on the floor. It's been very effective in their training. And part of it is injury prevention as well. I mean, sort of related to all those fields are the wearables and, doing a better job tracking their movements. And then it's not just the fact they're moving, but how much force is being put on that ankle that's being rehabilitated. All that stuff is making a big difference. And I also think part of the challenge now, and for the people in this room, is then to translate that for the fan. And part of it will be information that fans will get during the game, other information they'll get from league websites and apps and through social media. But I find all that information when I read about an athlete, let's say in another sport, and see what that athlete is going through, it clearly makes me more engaged. And back to your question about then seeing the live performance, it then causes me to want to tune in and see, Lindsey Vonn, my God, how does she do it? She's recovering. I mean, I don't know anything about downhill skiing or something, but then when she's racing and I'm reading about sort of her routine, her rehabilitation, what she's been through, and it's tried and true. I don't think anything's new under the sun from that standpoint. I just think it's a question of using all this information, using all this data, and putting it in a form that's understandable for our fans.
So you mentioned the owner who doesn't say they don't care about data, but they have 20 people analyzing it. And I've heard some people talk about this as an issue, sometimes in racing, where teams have more money and they can spend more money on analyzing the data. Have you confronted that at all? Is that an issue of one team only being able to afford 5 people to analyze data, another team doing 30 people?
It's a little bit of an issue, but I think it's frankly around the edges. I mean, we, of course, in the NBA, we have a salary cap system. It's not a so-called hard cap. Teams can pay above the cap and pay this tax. So, we've never made a secret of it from a league standpoint. A hard cap would be more of an equalizer. On the other hand, we think we have a system that can allow every team to be competitive. And then, of course, teams find other ways to compete. If you have a salary system that is essentially capped, you can argue that they can compete on the quality of the arena. They can compete on the quality of the team playing, and analytics are one of those things. Again, there's teams want to win. I think there is a certain governor in terms of, at the end of the day, they try to run a business that can be profitable and provide income that they can then reinvest into other aspects of their business and improve their arenas and everything else. But I would say I think it's somewhat around the edges, at least at our board meetings. There haven't been many discussions that wealthy owner is in such a position to spend more. But, it matters, and I think we're very sensitive in our league that, especially to, it's not always, I should say, it's not necessarily smaller market owners, but lower sort of revenue teams where we want a league where all 30 teams can compete. And it doesn't mean there's going to be necessarily parity every year in our league, but you want a quality of opportunity at least. And so the ultimate goal is you don't want the incredibly wealthy owner just be able to throw money at the issue. I think the good news from that standpoint, if you look at the success of particular teams in the league, let's say over the last 10 years, especially look at Oklahoma City or San Antonio, Cleveland, obviously, what they're doing now. I think whether it's fortuity of being able to get certain players, of course, is part of it, but a large part of it is the management acumen. It's, what Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford do is, there's a reason that so many teams in the NBA and frankly in other sports emulate their system. It's not that they're outspending other people, they're outsmarting a lot of other people, or they have a culture, they have a certain work ethic.
So last question for you, because you have a room full of broadcasters and partners and production people. What's your take on the state of the regional game, the broadcast, the national broadcast, as far as just the job that's being done? Are you satisfied with the quality of the broadcasts and the productions?
Yeah, again, I marvel at the quality now of high definition, the streaming. I mean, I watch enormous number of games on my phone, on my tablet. Of course, I watch League Pass. I watch seemingly on every different kind of device, and I think it's a golden age for sports broadcasting. I mean, the quality has never been better. The viewership, frankly, has never been higher. I was just looking at the numbers. I mean, whatever was going on in the NFL, whatever the cause, whether it's coincidental or not, they've pretty much bounced back post-election in terms of their ratings. I think the Giants Sunday night game was, I think, the highest rated in 27 years for a Week 14 game or whatever else. Major League Baseball had the highest rated Game 7 in 25 years, and we had the highest rated Game 7 in almost 20 years. So I think the business is incredibly healthy. Having said that, we can't take it for granted. And I think we're especially as you talk about that young generation, we're competing for fans. We're competing for attention and engagement every day. And one of the things I know that the NFL has pointed out, that even when their ratings were down over the first portion of the season, their reach was essentially the same. What was happening is the time spent viewing was down. And I think that's for a room full of production people, I feel in some ways that's a better problem to have. It's a lot harder to find new customers, to get people who otherwise aren't inclined to watch the NBA or the NFL and convince them to watch our sports on television. On the other hand, when finding ways through great production to find somebody, in our case, literally to move the rating, it means finding someone who's watching an average of 42 minutes and getting them to watch 5 minutes more. And that I think we should be able to do through, great camera angles, the new kinds of audio, interviews, great features, and new approaches to the game, using a lot of the data that we've talked about and putting it in a forum that creates an understandable narrative and story for our fans. And it's a great creative challenge for everyone in this room. And it's something, again, that it's really, at the end of the day, we'll get through collective bargaining. That's once every 6 years or so. It's the essence of my job, and it's also the most interesting part of my job.
Well, thank you, Adam, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken.
And please, a big round of applause.
Thank you.